what led to your original team up with the Erwins for like, I Can Only Imagine? How did that come about?
Yeah, we all had a mutual respect for each other. We both had ties. We all had ties to Nashville. They had just done their first movie that came out the same year that Unconditional did. And Andy called me up one day. He got my number from somebody, and he said, "Hey, man, I really liked your movie. I saw it, and I really appreciate it. I'd love to work with you in the future." And it was just like it was a call that blew me away because their movie did a lot better than mine. But he's like, "Yeah, in the future, I'm going to call you." I said, "Okay, cool." So they went to Sony and did Mom's Night Out. And then Woodlawn came around, and there was going to be so much action in that and so much football that he knew he wanted a second editor. And he was like me. He just edited all of his own stuff by himself. And that can wear you out, man. So he's like, "Bro, I need a co-pilot on this." And so he called me. I read the script. I loved it. Started doing Woodlawn with him. I ended up getting to do some music and story consulting on it, and editing it with Andy. And it was awesome. I loved that experience. And we segued right into multiple other projects. I Can Only Imagine. They really let me wear a lot of hats on that. And that's where I started telling everybody I was the adopted Erwin brother. I was the third Erwin brother. But yeah, man, we've collaborated on 5 or 6 things now. I feel very fortunate. John was really passionate about Jesus Revolution. Andy's really passionate about his next film that he's working on, called Fearless, which is a Navy SEAL movie, amazing book. So what happened was John still wanted to collaborate with somebody, so I got the invite to be the co on this, and I brought my thing to it. John brought his thing to it, and we had the most amazing cast and crew on this, and everybody brought their thing to it. And so it's definitely a movie that was raised by a village, and we just had some amazing quality people. But yeah, to go back to your question, we met out of like a mutual affinity and respect, because we're like these boys in the South, like trying to make life affirming, redemptive, uplifting content. And we had our first feature films come out, the same year. So that's how we found each other, really.
When was the idea or script for Jesus Revolution first brought to your attention?
That's a great question. We were working on Woodlawn. Woodlawn takes place in a similar time. It's a film about a school that had been recently desegregated, and the Jesus movement had started sweeping the country. And this chaplain goes in, and he's basically like, "Hey guys, you need to put aside your differences. It's about Jesus, and it's about the love of God. You guys need to like start loving each other." And they do. They kind of give into this thing, and they get kind of washed away in the Jesus movement. Well, in all of that, John was doing research as any good director would, and he stumbled across this crazy psychedelic Jesus cover of Time magazine in 1971, and it just said Jesus Revolution, and he got really intrigued by it, started trying to hunt the article down, and there was no digital archive of that article. So he ends up buying the collector's edition Time magazine off eBay for $150. But he cracks
Seems like a good investment now.
Oh yeah, that's $150 we would put down easy. But he cracks the thing open, and it's 10 pages of just amazing cinema, and no one's covered this period well in cinema ever, as far as a narrative feature, to my knowledge at least. And so he comes in the next morning with that magazine, and I remember it sat on his desk for months, but he's like, "Guys, we got to do this." And, we finished imagining him, and, we got out the door, and Lionsgate came on as a partner, and he was like, "Please, can we do this next?" And they're like, "Man, the music biopic, we want to keep going with that." And so, they went on and did I Still Believe and everything, and that was great. So that was the first time it was delayed. Then they wrote the script, and it was greenlit and everything, and COVID shut it down the second time. Well, then the third time it wanted to mount up, John and Andy were interested in other projects. And so I got invited to come on. And so 7 years later, and our third mount up for this, we actually made it, and it's, coming out in theaters 2023. And so, yeah, it's been a circuitous path to get it to the theater, but you hear that a lot from filmmakers, like stuff burns down, and there's a little bit of embers, and it revives, and burns down again. And, 10 years later, 5 years later, whatever it is, it ultimately gets made. So that was definitely the case here. It's been in a gestational period for almost a decade. So it's very humbling, but also exciting to see something that's cooked this long, finally get served as a meal.
What did you know about the Jesus movement before you read the script? Because ironically, I was married in 2003 at a Calvary chapel myself, but I was unaware of its history.
Yeah, I was really educated on it when I started doing research. So when John found that article and we had some downtime, I started doing a ton of research for it. And I found just some beautiful scenes, and I would chunk those away. And I ended up turning in like a small phone book dossier of like the stories and the anecdotes and the different places we could go with it. So I really was educated and entrenched in all of the Jesus movement stuff, Jesus culture, Jesus people. For me, it was newfound treasure. I didn't really know that much about it. And it actually taught me things about my upbringing that I just took for granted or didn't really understand where it was all coming from. So even, things I saw in Sunday school or like bumper stickers that people had on their car and stuff like that, but it was all from the Jesus movement. I was born in 1973. So, as the Jesus movement kind of had its heyday in 71, 72, I was born that next year. And there was still, a trickle effect all through the 70s because of the Jesus movement. To answer your question, it was definitely getting pulled into the research for this movie.
And it really was kind of a unique time in American history. Was there anything particularly crazy that you learned about the whole era while working on the film?
Yeah, there was just such a despondency pretty much across the world. There were political assassinations, JFK, Bobby, Martin Luther King, the epitome and the height of the civil rights movement, which continues today. You had our own state troopers gun down American students on American soil. The Cold War, the countercultural movement, all the kids dropping out and just running away. I mean, it was a dark, dark time. It was divided. People were yelling at each other. And quite frankly, people thought the world was going to end and that it was all going to be over. And so yeah, man, it was a wild time to drop into and think what it would be like. I think my mind took me back to what would it feel like if my president got assassinated. Like that just had to be some sort of like the most immense psychic trauma to a nation that could really happen. So I tried to dwell on that and think about what that would feel like and all the uncertainty. But the interesting thing about it is I think we find ourselves in a similar place with the divisiveness and how divided our country is, and everybody would rather scream at each other in all caps on Facebook than actually sit down and have a civil conversation and agree to disagree. You'd rather, like, it seems like it's gotten easy, and I'm talking about outside the church, but also inside the church, maybe inside the church even more, but it's gotten a lot easier to hate your enemy than it is to like sit down and have a conversation with somebody.
Well, that's interesting because there seems to be a parallel with what you just said with certain scenes within the movie when the so-called hippies started to come into the church and the, for lack of a better way of putting it, church elders who were more conservative were none too pleased with these people with bare feet coming in, and they were more concerned about their carpets getting, saving their carpets than saving their souls.
Yes, man. I guess for me, and these words are kind of blistering, and they're blistering to my heart too, and they should be. But there's your tradition, and there's your ideologies, politically or otherwise, and then there's what Jesus did. And Jesus hacked the traditionalists and the moralists of his time. And if he had just been a typical rabbi, just taught in synagogues and just stayed inside the synagogues and taught from the scripture, you would never know his name. There would not be a religion built around him. The whole idea of what he was trying to show you was there were hurting people out in the world. Get outside the church walls and go be with the people and love on everybody. He hung with the marginalized groups. He was criticized for them. He wasn't even supposed to talk to some of those people, but he did, And so I don't know, man, I just find his life so inspiring and beautiful to me. And and loving. And he went out of his way to love and care and meet people's needs. And it seemed like the only time he would ever like raise his voice or get really frustrated was when tradition was getting in the way of actually loving God and following God and loving people. And so yeah, man, that's a little bit of my the drum that I bang. You get my dad's DNA coming up in me. I'll start preaching a little bit, but
that's funny. Well, I don't necessarily disagree, because in every faith and in every there's always going to be some group that kind of is our modern day group of Pharisees.
Yes, we did it, and we gently did it, but we there were preachers at the time that were just so adamant against the Jesus movement. They thought it was wrong. And I don't get it, man. I don't get it. Like, everybody is made in God's image. Everybody's a child of God. Everybody is worthy of love. And Jesus said, even if you do choose to have political enemies in this country, and you actually view your neighbor who's flying whatever flag you don't fly in your yard, if you view them as your enemy, Jesus actually has a message for you too. Like, we're to love our enemies. And so so until we get back to that, I think we're going to continue to be spun out as a culture. And I'm talking to culture at large. I don't want to pick on the church. I think it's pervasive, and it's really a virus that's infiltrated our entire culture. And I hope when people go see our movie, they're just going to feel that this was crafted with so much love, and it's about a conversation, and it's more like, come to the table and let's talk. It's invitational, and it's very loving. And for me, I really feel the Spirit move in that arena of like what we were trying to build, as opposed to something that continues to divide.